If you've ever found yourself wondering why you keep attracting the wrong kinds of relationships, or you're tired of feeling unseen, unheard, or misunderstood, then this episode is for you. I'm chatting with PJ Livett, a brilliant sex and relationship educator, about what healthy love really looks like. We talk communication, conflict, self-worth, and how to truly connect without losing yourself in the process. It's honest, practical, and might just shift the way you look at love forever. Enjoy. PJ, welcome to Great Conversations. How are you today?
Very well, thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. I'm extremely excited about this conversation. We have a brilliant question from the previous guest to get to, though, before we jump in. So, PJ, what do you believe is the most critical skill or mindset the future generations need in order to thrive in this ever changing world?
That's such a good question. I love it. So I would say, in terms of critical skill, I'd say be a critical thinker. Ask yourself, what am I being sold? Like in any context, that can really help you. And in terms of a mindset, I'd say no matter what someone says to you or does to you, your value and worth never ever change. So be authentically you. You do you. You're the best person for the job. And comparison ultimately is the thief of all joy. So just don't even bother going there.
Yeah. Oh, I love both of them. And it's so funny because little tangents and then we'll come back. But I've been having the really interesting conversations recently around AI and how that's, sort of integrating itself into our life. And one of the things that has been coming up for me constantly is this skill of critical thinking. So it's absolutely amazing that you bring that in right off the bat, because that's what I've also been identifying as something that's really important in the future is the more that we use AI, the more that we then outsource our critical, the potential is that we outsource our critical thinking to a machine. And so I'm really interested. What is it about critical thinking that is so important for you?
It's giving I mean, for me, I work with young people predominantly, so it's giving them the permission almost to question what they're seeing, question what they're reading, because we are living in an instant culture. So it's, instant TV, instant takeaways, whatever it is, instant hookups. It's just this sense of, I think I want it, therefore I'm going to get it. And there's that gap in the middle that it feels like it's missed. So in terms of relationships, my field of work, it's very much about helping them learn those critical skills. What am I looking for? What do I value? Because that's really important before you begin a relationship. What am I looking for? What do I value? How do I value myself? How do I value sex? Is it transactional? Is it something I really value and I want to wait and protect for someone special? And so it's very much about, in terms of self-esteem as well. I could go on forever, but self-esteem, social media, all this stuff that's there in the young people's world. They're growing up in the digital age, and it's about saying to them, just question what you're looking at and what you're reading. And self-esteem particularly is so important because it impacts decision making, especially when it comes to sex and relationships. So in terms of even body image, what are you looking at? Actually, is it filtered? Chances are, yes, it's filtered, it's artificial, it's exaggerated. Same with the porn industry. What they're looking at is not a real reflection of sex and what bodies are actually like in real life. So critical thinking in all contexts, I think, is paramount.
And how do you, I agree. And how do you do that? What is a process or steps that you can go through in order to then engage that critical thinking?
First of all, let's assume there is some ulterior motive there. So what am I being sold? And when they balance that with their own beliefs, their feelings of what they understand about themselves, what they value and what they rate highly and what they're looking for, that kind of begins to create this level playing field where they can then be better informed to go, right, okay, I'm not sure that is for me. And another thing, a tip I say to the young people all the time is think about, check in with yourself. So if you're looking at something online, if you're reading something, if you're watching something, check in with yourself. What's your gut feeling? Are you feeling ultimately better and happier, or is it making you feel a bit uneasy or less confident, or is it chipping away at your self-esteem? They will know, they'll notice if they've got that gut feeling. And then it's helping them, and like I said, almost giving them permission to actually go against perhaps society in that sense and think, actually, I value that in a relationship, so I'm going to not partake in that. You know, it's just that freedom of choice, which I feel like there's this kind of like there's a roller coaster, and same with red flag behaviors. It's that kind of if they don't know the good qualities in a healthy relationship, it's much harder to spot those red flags. And a phrase I say to them all the time is, "You need to love yourself enough to walk away sometimes."
Oh, yes. That's a mic drop moment right there, PJ. And there's two things that are really jumping out as you're talking. I think the first I'd like to investigate is healthy relationships. You've used this term a couple of times now. And so, how are you defining, or how would you define a healthy relationship?
So, healthy relationships, I mean, relationships will look different for all of us because we're all different and we have different expectations and values. But there are key elements that will be present in a healthy relationship. So, we're talking about qualities like communication, trust, respect, mutual consent. It's very easy to become familiar with behaviors which aren't healthy, and therefore they feel normal, and therefore they feel right, and they feel safe because they're familiar. But sometimes what is feels safe isn't actually healthy.
One of the things that I'd really love for you to share your wisdom on is this concept of red flags, and what is it? We've got green, beige, and red flags, and people talk about and throw this terminology around quite freely. What are some of the real things that you should be looking out for? So, what are some of the things that are genuine, unhealthy behaviors, red flags that you need to be aware of, and then exit stage left if you can? And what are some of the things that maybe is an opportunity for you to investigate further, because it might be more of the the trauma and the sort of conditioning that you're bringing from your childhood into that relationship.
It's a very fine line between when a relationship goes from healthy to unhealthy and possibly even abusive. So there's the like you've said, the communication at the beginning of a relationship is key. And that should be the time through that honeymoon period, which can last, 18 months, 2 years sometimes. So we're full of loads of hormones. It's really intense and exciting. But the key thing is communication. And that's where you hopefully learn about each other. And if something shows itself and it's not helpful or comfortable for one of them, they are able to communicate and actually explain that. And it's about explaining, not blaming. So rather than going, you always do this and you always say that, it's actually saying that when you do that, this is how it makes me feel. And I'd love it if you could do this. And so you're kind of inviting them in to be part of the solution. So, like I said, no relationship's perfect. There are going to be bumps along the way. That's why communication is so important. If you can master that, even when you've been together for 25, 35 years, you've got that skill of communicating to work through things. So the difference is, I would say, is if you've got a situation where the conversations happened and, one partner's flagged something to the other and said, this makes me feel really uncomfortable, or this is a boundary I don't want to cross kind of thing. If that's not heard or respected or valued, that for me is a bit of a red flag because that person is, by doing nothing, that person is already saying, I don't really care enough to make changes. So we are happier in this relationship. So there's that middle ground, which is really fragile and, it's hard to navigate. If you can get through that, great. If not, that's often when the red flags start showing more and more. So it might be somebody who's controlling in some way, whether that's financial, sexual, emotional. It could be belittling, using words as weapons, putting someone down rather than building them up. It could be physical violence. There are lots of different behaviors that would be considered absolutely red flags. And if that becomes that kind of norm, and this is the danger, if someone grows up with that, witnessing it or experiencing it, it's very difficult for them to say that this isn't okay because that's the only relationship they know. And so you can see why this cycle, and I've been asked before about this, like, why do people go back to abusive relationships? And it's about the safety. It's familiar, therefore it feels safe. So it's a really complex, it's not an easy thing. It's very complex. But yeah, the classic red signs, I mean, things like negging, that's a new one that's come about. Have you heard of negging?
Oh, I think I have actually. Come on,
Yeah.
tell us. Go on, explain it.
So there's a fine line between flirting and hurting, and negging. An example would be something like, that dress looks amazing. It would look incredible on a size 6. Or it might be, nice haircut, makes your nose look really small. So it's basically someone coming in, selecting someone, choosing them. They feel flattered because they've been picked out, the crowd. Then this kind of compliment's given, but it's not quite. It's chipping away at their self-esteem. And then the other person, the recipient, effectively almost feels a bit like they have to justify themselves because they want to prove that they're not actually whatever it is. So you've got this beginning of a relationship, which is already this power imbalance. So it's a really unhealthy start to a relationship.
And how do you respond to that other than just tell them to jog on? And like, what's an empowered way to respond to somebody that says that? Because I can imagine in the moment it's a backhanded compliment, isn't it? So you're probably like, oh, and then it might take a while to be like, hold on a minute, that wasn't actually a compliment. So how do you respond to that in the moment?
And that's why it's really important from the perspective of young people, to build up their self-esteem, because if they recognize their worth and value, they're more likely to be in that moment strong enough to go, "Actually, wow." That's all you need to do is "Wow," and then walk off. You know, that one word says, "I don't like you. I don't approve of you. I'm not even gonna engage with you. I'm not wasting my breath," and off they go. And assuming they're with friends, they carry on with their friends, and that's it, you know? But it is about that inner strength, that real sense of, "I'm worth more than being treated like that." And that's why it's really crucial to work with young people who are formulating who they are, what they feel about, what they like, what they value, rather than going along almost in that sort of slippery slope where it's too late and they've entered a relationship. Their gut feelings telling them it's not right, but they don't quite know how to get out of it.
Yeah, and I think that, from my experience, that's the challenge. You don't willingly go into abusive, unhealthy relationships. The difficulty is once you realize that you're in that relationship, it's getting out of it. So I really loved what you were saying earlier on about empowering the future generations to take personal accountability for how they're showing up in relationships. Because whilst there has to be a component where people are able to, you know their own worth and ask for more in relationships. There's equally the other side, which is people knowing their own worth and choosing not to be narcissistic, abusive, bullying, coercive. And so, how do you build the level of self-esteem that you're talking to in order to then have healthy relationships in your life?
It's a massive, massive question and topic, as you can imagine. It is huge and it's so important. And so I think, I mean, obviously come in running workshops, shops and talks. So I'm only a part of the big picture, but I would say first and foremost, it's about addressing everyone in the room. So I don't know anyone there. I don't know their experiences, gender, sexuality, whatever. So I will go in there and I genuinely feel I'm on their side. So I want them to begin to think about the fact that they all deserve and absolutely have the right to experience healthy relationships. And that's like a simple one sentence kind of scenario, but it is about that all again, about that permission, which sounds odd because they don't need permission. But at the same time, I think we need to say it to them. And actually, even by saying it, you're empowering them to begin to believe that they are actually able to experience that if they haven't so far, or if they're not even in a relationship yet. And I do exercises around the qualities within healthy relationships. So they individually get to choose what they value. And by looking at that, bit of a pyramid. So their top value, and then the two beneath, and then the three, and then the four. By doing that, they are actually beginning to work out what they like, what they value, and that alongside the whole "I deserve this, I'm allowed to have this," you suddenly get a place where they're in this position of going, "Okay, so when something comes along perhaps that isn't meeting that," so if respect is gonna be top, one of the top sort of qualities that they're looking for, boys, girls, all gender, sexuality, and someone is there who isn't showing respect, they're much more likely to quickly go, "Actually, do you know what? No, thanks," and leave, rather than enter into something and have that sense of, "I don't like it, I'm not happy with it, but I don't know what to do." So it's very much the background work, and self-esteem, I link it a lot to social media and what they're seeing. So even how they feel about themselves physically, that will affect their self-esteem and therefore their decision making when it comes to emotional choices. And all of this needs to be talked about before emotions get involved. So, I always say, sometimes people are a bit concerned. They're going, yeah, but what about if they're a bit too young? The reality is, in terms of porn, we know age 7 and 8 year olds are watching it. So actually, they're growing up with no frame of reference of sex or body types. So by the time they're 12, 13, 14-year-olds, they've got a very distorted view of what is normal. So it's really kind of giving them enough information that is age and timely in terms of appropriateness, but so they can kind of be that critical thinker very early on. And, if someone is saying something or implying that's what you need to do to have this lifestyle, if they already know what they like and value, and they already begin to feel a bit good about themselves because they know they deserve and are absolutely allowed to have these healthy relationships, they're in a stronger position to go, I can choose. I've got autonomy. I've got agency. I can choose whether I engage with you or not.
Yeah. I love what you're saying, and I think that's the key bit is deserving, isn't it? And the self-worth piece, because I think identifying what you value in a relationship in some ways is the easier part of the exercise. The sticky bit is in the moment if you're faced with somebody, like you said, that is not maybe showing you respect. In that moment, valuing and knowing you have, grounded in self-worth to be like, "I deserve better. I'm gone." And that's, I think, the tricky bit for a lot of people because, um, self-worth is so powerful and fundamental, and it's often not role modeled in a healthy way in society. I absolutely agree with you. And how do you build that level of self-worth or self-esteem to, in that moment, choose you and walk away?
I heard this amazing story. It was so encouraging because it feels like a minefield and it can feel like a massive problem you're never going to solve, but I feel like it's very much about your circle of influence. You can impact who you impact. And from my perspective, it's that ripple effect. So I am, again, a student from a school. She was year 10 at the time. So they were all around 14, 15 years old. And she told me that a boy in her year had sent her a nude and was asking for one back. And she looked at this and she was just horrified and said, "Why would I send you one?" So she replied to him and said, "Why would I send you one? Do you not respect yourself or your body?" And yeah, and in that moment, he then replied and he said, "I've never thought about it like that before." So she was basically saying, if you respect your body, do you really want to be sending it around to people who don't even want to see it? Like, how's that going to make you feel in your self esteem? And they ended up having this dialogue, and his eyes were opened. He was beginning to look at himself from that perspective of building his own self esteem and valuing his body and his self worth. And that was peer on peer. So, as much as we hear about peer on peer abuse, there is also the power of peer on peer in terms of getting someone to think maybe a little bit differently just because that person's been brave enough to stand up and challenge what's been sent or said to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you do that in a way that is safe? Because again, with what we're seeing in the world at the moment with men's violence against women, and let's just assume, maybe unfairly so, that oftentimes it's men doing things that women are then in a position where they want to hold them accountable to it and provide that alternative perspective. What are some tips for navigating that conversation in a way that you know is maybe safe?
It's really difficult because often when things, if we're talking about things being sent on devices, it's a shock. So that initial reaction is shock. This scenario at school, I think it worked well because they were in the same year group. So she was aware of him, he was aware of her. And I guess she felt able to. If it's a stranger, that's really different. And I guess you could potentially either, yes, you could just ghost them, block them, report them, or, you could say a one liner, sorry, mate, I value myself too much. And even they just use the word value. Maybe it'll be something to them for them to think, well, what's value got to do with it? You just don't know. And ultimately, it's about you keeping safe and feeling safe. So, you should never put pressure on anybody to respond in a certain way because it's going to be down to them in that moment.
It's such a minefield, relationships, isn't it? And particularly romantic relationships, of how to navigate it in a world that, as you say, has just got so many unhealthy, examples of relationship and what it looks like to be, an individual showing up in relationships in terms of body type, what you put up with, what you do. It's yeah, it's really it's really tricky. And I love what you're advocating, which is, ultimately you've got to come home to yourself, know yourself, respect yourself, love yourself, and then the healthy relationships will follow from that. Um, and so I'm really interested. How did you end up in this space? And how is this your life's work?
Yeah, it's an unusual one. I was 14 years old when I had a little seed sown, and I was so passionate at 14 about healthy relationships. And from then on, I decided I was going to be a sexual therapist. That was my plan. From a young age, I obviously was really passionate about relationships. As I got older, I decided to study psychology, and then I was thinking about specializing. But I ended up working with year 10 and 11 students in a voluntary capacity. And that was a light bulb moment. And what changed for me was, rather than work when things have already broken down or there are already difficulties, if we invest in young people, we're taking a preventative, proactive approach. How much more powerful could that be? So that was like the shift in my direction. I then raised the family. We've got 3 lovely humans, all now young adults, and, so I did various jobs that fitted in with life, and I just couldn't get away. These, the itchy feet were there, and this passion was burning. Just a little flame for many years. It was 28 years later that I actually took the plunge. The kids were grown up, and I thought, "I'm gonna do this." So I stepped out, the craziest journey of my life and the scariest, but did it, and it was the best decision I have ever made. We're wired, aren't we, to be in relationships, whether it's intimate or romantic or colleagues at work. If we raise generations who, first of all, don't want to talk about sex and relationships because it's taboo and shameful, because previous generations haven't known how to, then we're not giving them any tools. So they'll have this instant culture vibe, but actually, how do you communicate effectively? How do you argue effectively? Because we are going to all disagree at times, and an argument doesn't necessarily mean divorce. So let's work out how you can disagree with someone and find a way forward. So all these kind of skills and tools that we just kind of assume people are going to know as they grow up. This is why this is really important, and giving them that, and linking with everything we've spoken about already with the self-esteem, self-worth and value. They're then equipped emotionally and with their kind of knowledge and the attitude side of it and the skills. If we're talking about sexual health, it's actually looking at the skills involved. Um, that is really going to help them for their future.
How do you go into the world of sex and educate people on discovering what they like, what their sexuality might be? Then how do they keep themselves safe? Like, how do you even go about starting and exploring that conversation?
So I will go into the space, and I always try and think of the 1%. So, somebody in that room could have had an abortion, somebody could have been raped, sexually assaulted, somebody could have perhaps inherited HIV from a parent, all these things. And so it's about, I always come back to that bottom line about the self-esteem and healthy relationship stuff, because all of that is tied into a sexual health workshop as well. It's not just about the practicalities of what contraception's available. It's going back before that and helping them think, right, whatever gender or sexuality they might be, it's like, what is it that I know I'm looking for, and how can I be safe in that? And so relationships are going to be different. And some people might decide they don't want to ever be parents, or they don't want to use artificial contraception, or they're not yet sexually active, or they might be considering sexual activity. So it's trying to make it general enough so everyone in the room can benefit from what's being shared. So they're informed and they're empowered to make decisions that are right for them in their situation. So when you're thinking about sex and intimacy, like, we are at our most vulnerable when we are sexually intimate with someone. So again, it's about saying to people, actually, this is about connection and communication. And if you can't communicate with someone, you don't have mutual consent, because you can't consent unless you're communicating, whether that's verbally or non-verbally, then you can't really have those probably very satisfying, fulfilling sexual relationships. Because at the end of the day, consent, for example, sometimes young people roll their eyes because they've heard all about consent. But actually, if you think about it in terms of being emotionally, physically safe, there is this bit where it's about them realizing that it's about pleasure. And this is not a word used in the curriculum, but pleasure is so important. It's about likes and dislikes. Consent is about likes and dislikes. So if you're with somebody and you want a mutually satisfying experience, you need to communicate. You need to be able to understand what people like, don't like, what their boundaries are, so you can respect those boundaries. If you don't feel safe, chances are you're not going to feel as great as you could in that moment. So when you're, vulnerable, because you are emotionally and physically vulnerable when you're sexually intimate, if you have those building blocks around you, the good communication, the trust, the respect, the honesty, the faithfulness, all this stuff creates this safety bubble, which allows two people to be much more intimate. And I often refer to Avatar, and there's a great quote in Avatar: I see you. I see you. And it's about intimacy. And if you break intimacy down into me see, it's about the real depths of getting to know someone. And when you have that, sex is usually so much better because you are learning together, you're exploring together. So actually, it blows the argument about practice, trial and error. It does blow that out of the water a little bit, because you've got some people, I've spoken to some people who have committed to each other and they've learned as they've gone along. So there is this element of trust, and you build and you learn, like we learn anything. It's a skill. It's about an experience, and actually, with those, all those thrown together, is a much more fulfilling and satisfying scenario.
First of all, I love how you broke down intimacy into me see. Absolutely love that. How do you create intimacy in a relationship?
Yeah, because intimacy, interestingly, people assume it's to do with sex. You can be intimate in so many different ways. It could be, and I know this might sound a bit odd, but if you are both being intentional, you could literally sit there and look into each other's eyes for 2 or 3 minutes. That's amazing. Having a hug for at least 20 seconds. Again, there's a physiological change in the bodies. If you're being held and you are holding someone, exhale in the moment. That's really intimate. It could be sharing experiences. It could be jumping off on a bungee. It's anything, but it's a moment that you shared. So it doesn't have to be sexual at all, but it's about the quality time and about you two being in that bubble, in each other's bubble.
So, must we define intimacy for ourselves and have a relationship with that concept before we can be intimate with other people? I'm just where my brain is sparking is, obviously we've spoken about how to create a healthy relationship, and part of that is understanding, what you value, what's important to you, building up your self-esteem. But then I'm just interested if the same applies to this concept of intimacy. So how I would define intimacy might be different from how you would define intimacy. It's like, the love languages, like the 5 different love languages, I think that's where my brain's going. Is that the same with intimacy as well?
Yeah, and that's all part of it. It's all part of this kind of, there's a massive puzzle of lots of pieces, and it will, like you said, it will look different for all of us, but it's knowing what you value. So the 5 love languages are absolutely, I mean, I've literally seen it change marriages and relationships. Yeah, because if you imagine, even if you know about the 5 love languages and you speak the language that you like to your partner, that's still not gonna tick their box necessarily, because you've got to understand their language. It's like 2 people having different languages. If you learn their language, you are gonna communicate so much more productively.
For those who don't know about love languages, would you just, tell people what it is? And
So,
yeah,
Dr. Gary Chapman created 5 love languages, and they are basically a summary of how we all experience feeling loved, but we'll rate them differently. So, it's gonna be physical touch, which isn't sexual, but it's physical touch, gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, and one other one, which has
acts
gone
of
from me.
service?
Acts of service, thank you, yeah. But these are 5 ways somebody can feel loved, and I describe it as an emotional bank account. So if you are depositing in that emotional bank account of your partner, they're going to feel more fulfilled, more content, and happy in the relationship. So an example could be that someone produces a beautiful bouquet of flowers, but that person's love language is words of affirmation, not gifts. So they might say, "Oh, that's nice, thanks," and then put them in the vase, and that's it. If that person arrives home and says, "You know what, I really love what you've done," or "I really appreciate that. You are incredible. I love how you did," whatever it is, that is gonna fill their emotional bank account up until they're bursting. And if both of you in the relationship are doing that, you are maintaining your bank accounts. And if your emotional needs are not met, the opposite happens. So you get the withdrawals all the time until you are kind of empty, potentially resentful, and you're just cruising the relationship. You're existing rather than thriving. So really powerful. And like I said, literally, I've seen it change relationships. It's like a massive light bulb that just turns on.
Well, it is particularly when, you know, my understanding is that we also tend to show love in the way that we like to receive it. So, again, we can be showing up in relationship thinking that we're showing our partner how much we love them, but they're not feeling that because they've got a different love language. And I keep going back to this just communication, isn't it? Like everything that you're talking to is about not, well, first of all, self awareness, and then also communication around that. And that seems to be the linchpin of healthy relationships is that ability to communicate effectively and vulnerably.
Yeah,
Mm.
communication and a sense of humor, I think those 2 things you need probably in a relationship.
And it's just
But
life, isn't it? You just gotta laugh your way through life sometimes. And so building on this concept of communication, how do you argue effectively and in a way that brings you closer together rather than sort of decimates a relationship?
yeah, um, it takes discipline and choice. You've got to be intentional. So it's about, first of all, going, we value our relationship enough to not let this break it. So we care enough about this and not each other. And then it's about saying to yourselves, right, I'm going to listen to the other person. I don't know if you've heard of the talking stick. I mean, it could be anything. It could be a pen. Yeah. But it's a physical thing that you give to each other. One, the person holding it is the person speaking, and the other person needs to really actively listen, and then that is reflected back. So you could say, so I think I've heard you say this, and then you explain. So you're checking the understanding. So there's no misunderstandings. And if there have been, you clarify before you move on. And then you pass it over to the next person, and then they speak and the other person actively listens. Because the thing people, I think, forget about sometimes is this active listening. So we've got 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. And when we are listening, if we are thinking about our response to what's being said to us, we're already not listening effectively because we're thinking we've got that internal dialogue going, or they've raised a problem about something, and you're thinking, right, I know what they can do to fix that. So it's really about slowing it down and just listening and reflecting everything back, checking the understanding, and then, like I said earlier, about this explain, don't blame. Explain the situation and how it's impacting. It's I statements. I feel like this. I find this hard. Rather than you, because then they're just going to get defensive and put the walls up. So
And is there a way of when in order to do that, like in the moment, is it advisable to take a time out and come back when both parties have maybe, you know, are not as angry, are not as triggered, is not as activated, so that you can actively listen and get your talking stick out and sort of engage in this process? Like, is that the advisable way of navigating things? Because when you're in the moment, it can be so easy to throw insults and, as you say, and want to be right and not listen at all, and then you both become entrenched in I'm right, you're wrong, and neither party will give or take. Or then you have people with different communication styles and different argumentative styles where they will just silent treatment, or they will, leave the room and they won't engage. And you often can have dynamics, can't you, where one person leans in and wants to have these conversations and talk it through, and the other person just shuts down and won't engage. So how do you go about navigating those
so
different
that
dynamics as well?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. There are so many personality types in terms of
Mm.
how we communicate and how we respond to some sort of threat. So, an argument could be perceived as that threat. Someone's disagreeing with me, someone's angry with me, whatever it is. So, again, external processes, internal processes, really different responses to a conflict situation. So, for someone who's wanting to externalize everything, they need space and time to be able to go and get it out there. Someone who's more of an internal processor needs time to go away, think about what's happened, reflect on it, and then come back. That again comes back to communication, understanding each other well enough to know how they need to be loved in that room, in that moment. So, yes, you're fired up. Yes, you're disagreeing about something. But again, if you know that person well enough, you'll know they need some space. The key is if someone needs space, to agree a time to come back and talk, and make sure you do that. Otherwise, it is that kind of almost stonewalling or just going for the silence treatments. And that's just really unhealthy.
And are there or is there a way to discover what your communication style is? Because again, like I'm loving everything that you're saying. And for me, it all comes back to this level of self awareness. So understanding self before you can then show up and give your partner what they need. So how do I find out what my communication style is?
There are loads, yeah, loads out there. Just search for questionnaires. There's so many out there, and you can choose what kind to do. Yeah, like you've got different personality type kind of questions. Same with communication. But I think even self awareness. Just stop and think about yourself for a minute. When I feel stressed, do I instinctively need to go and talk to someone to defuse, or do I go quiet and reflective and just withdraw a bit? Because even noticing that about yourself, you'll begin to understand, okay, so I'm a bit more that way. And none of it's kind of wrong or right. It's just differences. And again, it's about knowing that different isn't wrong. It's just we are wired differently. But part of is communication and commitment. And part of that commitment is investing in understanding the person you're sharing your life with.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I love the work you're doing because this should be core of every curriculum though, because it's just as you said earlier, relationship is life and we are not taught how to effectively be in relationship. And I know we've spent the majority of our conversation talking about romantic relationships, and the principles apply, like I think you said earlier, in every relationship in your life. One of the things that I really appreciate about your work and the conversation that we've had is this idea of equality and pleasure and enjoyment, that both people need to be fulfilled and seen and a part of the relationship. So we are nearing the end of our conversation. So PJ, I'm going to ask you the question that I ask all my guests, which is, what is something that other people value that you don't?
Having the latest gadget.
Ooh.
Yeah. I'm just not. I mean, I need what I need to function, but I'm not seeking the latest gadget, whether that's a phone or laptop or TV or whatever. It just doesn't interest me enough to keep up with it like that. So I'll replace things as and when I need to, and they need to be able to function, obviously. But yes, no, I'm not a sort of a gadget fan.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that's because you live your life present in relationship with those around you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah, rather
yeah.
than sort of hooked on and aligned to gadgets. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. PJ, thank you so much for your time today and for our conversation. It's been so informative. And I've got so many nuggets of wisdom that I'm gonna take away with me. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Great Conversations. I hope PJ's insights gave you a new perspective on what it really means to build healthy, respectful, and fulfilling relationships, starting with the one you have with yourself. This episode is proudly sponsored by Integrate, a personalised wellbeing platform for those who are thriving but want to go deeper. If you're looking for more practical tools and tips on love, connection, and self-worth, then head over to www.integrate.net and join our community. And if you enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe and share it with friends. It really does mean the world to us. As always, I'd like to thank my editor, Stian Moritz, and musician Jamie Jenkin. Sending you all so much love. Bye for now.